All right, we're live. Welcome to Burn the Ship, my friend. We are recording. This is the podcast with the goal of connecting entrepreneurs with professionals that can help you go all in on your business. Um, this is an exciting podcast for me. I've done a little bit of my homework on you as well. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself so the kind of the people behind the camera can know what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I'm Rick Mayo. I'm currently the founder and CEO of a fitness franchise. It's called Alloy Personal Training. We've actually been in business since 1992. So I opened the original location when I was a junior in college in 1992, and that same location is our current corporate office. So I've
Wow.
literally walked through that same door probably to 20 million times.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's been a long, interesting journey. I'm happy to discuss all the different phases. But to any of your listeners, because I know that the audience might be people obviously that would consider becoming an entrepreneur or getting into their own business venture. I can tell you right now that I started in a place that was probably 10 steps behind where a lot of you guys are if you're just listening to this podcast. So props to you guys for even leaning in to the right types of information. Um, so yeah, I mean, look, I say this and I don't even mean it tongue in cheek. And then a lot of times I hear people say this and I kind of giggle, but I really mean it. Like if someone like me can do what I've done, like you can definitely do it. Now there's some things that you're going to have to do to make that process possible. But yeah, it's been a long, long, crazy journey. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, tell me a story. Tell me a little bit about that story of how you kind of opened that first location to where you guys are now. I'm interested.
Yeah. So the original location, like I mentioned, I was a junior in college. So I was just bouncing around, and our business is the same as it was in 92. So same brand promise. So I think anyone listening at this in this day and age will understand what a personal trainer is. But if you go back to 1992, it's hard to believe for most of your listeners, but there was no internet. So it's like, when you talked about, hey, I'm a personal trainer, people were like, what does that mean? Like, what do you even do? Right. So we were sort of, I was, and a small group of my friends, were sort of in the leading, I guess, creation of that position. And I think maybe on the West Coast they might have been a bit ahead of us because I went to school here in Atlanta as well, so I'm pretty much from here. Even though my family would kill me if I didn't say I was originally from Texas, I pretty much grew up in Atlanta. But so in 1992, I was bouncing around, paying my way through college, and training people in their homes. I had some, superstar customers like Madonna, Usher. I mean, that was sort of what personal training was. That's what all the cool kids did, right? And then instead of bouncing around to people's homes in different health clubs, I thought, well, wouldn't it be a great idea to just put four walls and a customer experience around this high end service? And there wasn't any such thing as what people would call boutique fitness these days. And
Right.
there's a million brands, whether it's boot camp or cycling or yoga or, Orange Theory or whatever those things are. There's a bunch of them now, but back then there was nothing. So the idea of putting four walls around a high end service was sort of a novel idea. I really did it because I thought I could create a better customer experience around this high end service. Like we could do towel service and, have the right equipment and they wouldn't have to fight with other gym members to get to things. Um, and it was just more convenient for me, if I'm honest. I wouldn't have to drive from gym to gym and home to home, and I could train everybody in one spot. And so, yeah, we on a shoestring budget, we opened the facility, and I pulled in just some friends of mine and put them in the space, and we were off and running. And thankfully, it was well received. Um, Fast forward to maybe 98. So we're 6 years in. I'm married at this time. I have a mortgage. I have a one kid, one on the way. And I wasn't really running a tight ship as far as a business. I was simply a facility where I had not even employees. At the time, we did everything wrong. We had 1099, contractors, which basically just means in layman's terms, they don't really work for you. You sort of contract their help and then they do their job. And in this day and age, it's almost illegal to do that. But back then, that was sort of the norm. And a couple of guys looked at me and thought, Rick's not that smart. Like, we should go and open our own place. And in hindsight, I'm like, well, I don't really blame them. When I look back on it, I
Yeah.
probably would have thought the same thing. And so I had a handful of employees that held a large percentage of my overall clientele and revenue. And the way that I had the business structured, it allowed them to sort of build these exclusive relationships with their customers at the expense of my business. And so when I had three or four folks leave, I mean, we went, Bailey, from $83,000 a month in revenue which was a lot. And you think about 1998,
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole different ballgame in a
Yeah.
very small footprint,
It's a
right? So
million
very high
dollar
revenue per
business. You
square
know,
foot.
that
Yeah,
80,000 a month is a good number.
yeah, 100%, especially in a tiny business like that. Well, we went from that to within 3 or 4 months down to 12 grand a month.
Oh,
So I mean,
wow.
it's that drastic for us, and it was nothing more than just a mass exodus of the people that were working there, all to go out and try to do, their own thing, similar to what we were doing. And so at the time, it was like, well, I guess I have to get a real job now. I guess I better put on some khakis and get into a cubicle and get a real job. And then it was like, well, hold on. Like, obviously, there's a market for this thing. I have all the risk. I've got the lease and the marketing and all the things that I'm doing. So why don't I do what any good business owner would do and start building some systems so that I can own all the processes, right? So we started with the simple stuff, like, obviously it's personal training. So start with the workout stuff. That's the most basic stuff. So we started with, hey, if this, then that. So if a customer comes to us and they have this goal or this injury or whatever, then there would be these algorithms that would lead them to the right program so that we could own the programming and we could just plug in the coaches, and it wouldn't be necessarily reliant on hiring experts in weight loss or, older people or injuries or athletes. We
Right.
didn't have to do that. We knew all that. So let's own that process. And then that just sort of cascaded into sales processes and sales scripts, and how do we say hello and goodbye and how do we answer the phone. And I mean, literally every piece of the business became a system. And so that was certainly an impetus, and at the time it was horrible, but it turns out it was the crux move for what became for us a lot of consulting, because as we came out of that, we had a really tight system. Business took me about 18 months to get back on my feet. Business grew like crazy. Then people were coming to us saying, hey, can you come and speak at my event to talk about what you're doing, because we had learned how to service personal training in a very interesting way. And it was like, sure. So it became consulting, and then people started asking, well, can I buy your sales system, or can you write our workouts? I mean, just imagine any of the parts and pieces of
Mm.
a small brick and mortar, boutique fitness studio. And so, that led to what we called licensing.
Yeah.
And that was probably 16 years ago. Now, licensing can be confusing because we're now full franchising, can be confusing with that. But just imagine through the lens of this call, we're white labeled powering other brands, right? And we took that, Bailey, to 2,500 clubs worldwide, everywhere from India to Dubai, and Cyprus, and Tasmania, and all the other
With
strange
just the
places I can
licensing
think of,
model.
with just the licensing model. And that put me on the
Wow.
board for some of the world's largest franchises, not just fitness, but say Anytime Fitness. So I sat on their advisory board for 5 years. They have 5,000 locations. And we built something for them that they could deploy into their franchise. Same thing with Gold's Gym. And so I really got a nice peek under the covers at franchising. And here I was sitting on these, advisory boards for these giant franchise companies. And then we started to have, I would say, people like us, which would be boutique fitness, coming to us and saying, hey, can you build our sales system? Can you write our workouts? And these are brands that everyone's heard of, household brands at this point in time. And at that point, we were like, listen, instead of powering everyone else's stuff, we need to make a run at this on our own. And I can talk about the reasons why we chose to do that. But yeah, that was it. So we launched the full-on franchise in 2019, and obviously there was something happened in 2020, which kind of set everyone back a bit, if you don't remember. And then once the veil lifted from COVID, we cranked up the marketing and sales for the franchise. So we're at 115 sold in right at 2 years. 50 open by year's end, and yeah, all fun and games. But think about all those stages, and I'm happy to discuss any of those with your audience. I mean, I am a business illiterate personal trainer that opens a gym out of convenience, has to learn how to market, right? Has to learn how to hire people. From that to consulting, it's like now people are asking me what to do in their business. Then it became a license, then it became a full-on franchise. And each one of those stages required a different version of me to be able to do that, right? So I think, any questions you may have about that, but that's really the long-winded version, but here we are.
Sure. So, you kind of learn like we learn in our business, right? So, like, the background of the podcast was like COVID related as well. I had a lot of meetings just like this during COVID. I went to a lot of networking events just like this during COVID. I met people 60 seconds at a time during COVID. And the podcast was really a way to kind of give back and create some marketing fuel and hear the story of people. Honestly, the average business owner at that time was really, really nervous about the future of their business. You know what I mean? And so we
Mm-hmm.
approached the podcast with a matter of certainty about what it is that we did, that people appreciated. And so we kind of learned the same way as you did. You know, like we went through phases of, you know, what the podcast was and what it did for our company, and learning those things by what went well and what did not go well is really the only reason that we were able to kind of iron out that process for ourselves, right? So like my question to you is, do you think that where you are today required all of those steps for you to learn and kind of utilize and perfect the process? Or do you think that just when you kind of hit the market with the franchising opportunity in 2019 was kind of the sweet spot there in your industry for, you know, there was an opportunity there in your industry that you kind of seized?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, really. I really do. I think, listen, when we were coming up, there weren't people that had done what we were doing, so that we were at a bit of a disadvantage. So I mean, look, 31 years in business. I don't necessarily recommend that it takes people 31 years to get there.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and now there are resources, right? Like it's a different world these days. Like if you have no excuse these days not to be a straight savage. I really mean that. I know it sounds cliche, but it's so true. Here's a prime example. What are we doing right now? I didn't have this, right? I didn't have the ability to open my smartphone, go to Spotify and listen to a podcast and be able to gather information or watch a YouTube series on sales or marketing. Or I mean, it's everywhere now. There's zero excuse not to shortcut the process now. And there's tons of mentors out there and people that have done it who are very forthright with all the information and the ways that they've done it. I mean, 100%. So I don't regret any of my stages. There's no way I could have done it any other way than I did it. But I also don't recommend that it is exactly the same. I think you can shortcut the process based on the speed and access of information that we have available to us today.
Sure, absolutely. And so as you're kind of scaling up, right? You said right now, remind me of those numbers one more time. You said 115 sold in 2 years. You've got 50 up and running by the end of the year. Is that what you said?
Correct. That's correct.
What's the next, you know, X amount of time look like for you? Are you guys just kind of pumping the pipeline full of people that are interested in that? And where do you find those people?
Yeah, just combination. I mean, thankfully, we have a pretty big profile in the fitness industry. So people that are in the fitness industry, when they hear that we have this new vehicle, which is franchise, we've had some really great folks that are high level operators that maybe are done with their private brand and they want to go with Alloy now and scale it. Because a franchise gives you the bandwidth to do instead of like one unicorn facility, maybe you could do 10 because now you have the bandwidth and the partnership of the franchise, which helps you right to scale the system. So those people. We also work within something called the consultant network. So this is unique to franchising, where there are franchise consultants who are people that go out and they find their own leads for people that maybe want a different investment vehicle or they want to leave big corporate and become entrepreneurs. And then they will sort of do a full psychological analysis and financial analysis on them to say like, what are you interested in? What do you want a day in the life of to look like? Or do you want to be a semi-absentee owner? Or do you want to be in your business? I mean, there's a million criteria, and then they'll present to these folks, different franchise opportunities.
Yeah.
So we join these organizations where on one end you have potential franchisees, and on the other end you have consultants, right? And so it's like they sort of bring them together and present to them the franchise opportunity. So if we're part of those organizations, we're sort of like an inventory on the shelf that the consultants can show to people that they think meet our criteria. So we get a lot of leads from there, a lot of organic leads from the fitness space, and that's pretty much it. And as we're growing, as you can imagine, now we have people that are clients and members of facilities who want to do their own because they've seen success with it. They enjoy partaking in it as an end user, a consumer. And now they're like, I didn't know this was a franchise. Like, I want to buy one of these, right? I'm going
Right.
to take these to my market. And so they want to go and buy their own. So a combination of everything. I think at some point, Bailey, in franchising, if you can continue to tell a good story, meaning good return on investment, the systems are solid, you get plenty of support, like all the things that people would wish for from a turnkey business model, which is what a franchise should be, then
Yeah.
at some point sales become much easier,
For
right?
sure.
Because it's like,
Business in a
oh, who
box.
wouldn't do it? Yeah, and we've got a lot of the thing I'm most proud of is we have a lot of current franchisees who are adding multiple additional locations and or territories. And so that's a great sign, because if they have been successful and pleased up to this point, they're like, hey, give me more, like before this thing sells out, because sales are brisk. I want to buy the rest of Charlotte or Salt Lake or Charleston or wherever these markets are, right? I mean, we're everywhere, honestly. But so yeah, it's kind of fun to see that. And yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does.
I
It
tend to
does.
go on tangents, so.
No, it does. And how big are you guys slicing up the pie when you're selling? Or are you like individually valuing territories? I'm assuming every territory is valued differently. So, and then based on how big you want is based on the valuation, and then you're requiring them to be outfitted with a retail space. Like, what is the process for a franchisee?
Yeah, so we've got really advanced software. There's probably three big softwares in the franchise space that do detailed analytics. So we've literally mapped out the entire lower 48, the continental US. And so our runway's 900 and so 920-ish, and probably more, honestly. That's just like a liberal look
Yeah,
at,
that's if
a
everybody's
generous
eating the
look.
biggest pieces of the pie. Yeah,
Right. And so we give a pretty liberal search area. And then once someone chooses a location, we drill down, we've got the address, and we give them a 30,000 person radius. Now imagine our metrics, the archetype that we're going for, it dictates all of our real estate, right? So because personal training can be a bit more expensive, we're targeting, say, 45 to 65-year-old folks, right?
mm-hmm.
Because they have more money, just the nature of the beast. They've lived longer to, rub a few nickels together. So
Sure.
like we're going after those people, a population density of them, certain household income, right? So there's all these metrics that choose where we go. And then our model is very simple. You only need 130 to 150 members tops to be like a very relevant and great return on investment model. So you don't need 700 or 800 members like maybe a boot camp would, right?
Right.
We have very low churn, so it's sort of like, hey, we can and we have pre-sold clubs completely full during pre-sale. And what that means on the back end is like you open with a full facility, so
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of figure out what that would look like on a financial return on investment, right? But all that's dictated by the real estate. And then once we drop that pin in the map, we give you a protected radius of 30,000 people. Now, in most of our markets, as densely populated as they are, that may be
Yeah.
2 to 3 miles,
Yeah.
and that's your protected area. Now, what's interesting is if we get pretty liberal with the search areas, because we want people to find real estate. Once they pick a location, drop a pin on the map, there may actually be runway for more than one location in that original search area, right? Because you think, local knowledge of the area, you pick a location,
Right.
but that zip code might be pretty big, right? Or that area. So you
Yeah.
might be able to drop another one a
Being
few
from
miles away
Atlanta
if there's
like you, I speak that language where 4 blocks away is another set of 30,000 people, and it's
right.
take you an hour to get there sometime during the day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you cross a highway or anything like any of these natural barriers that we consider. So if we backfill those, we'll probably have a much longer runway even than the 900 and so that we mentioned. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of criteria that go into it. We even send the real estate vendors into your market to find the space, and they have all our criteria. We get the final say whether or not you get it. We run mock-up architecture. We make sure the cost is not too expensive. We run a mock-up fit so that it's like, hey, is this thing going to be too expensive to build out, which would bust the business model? So, is the rent factor where it needs to be to make money, but also be in the right area? So there's a ton of criteria. Tiered pricing for different markets. You can imagine like New York City would be different than like Kansas City, as an example, right? Of
Sure.
course. So it's like, all right, you have to consider that. And so there's a lot of little things that we move around on the puzzle pieces that we move around on the board. But at the end of the day, it works. And so it's a very detailed process, and we run it, corporately, so that
Sure.
our franchisees, we want them to be involved and participating in the process, but we also want to give them plenty of bandwidth so they don't have to like, sign a franchise agreement and then like go find a space. It's
Yeah.
like, I can't imagine, like, if you haven't done that, how intimidating that would be. And I tell you, people that we have in the system that have been entrepreneurs on their own, they like it the best, because they're like, oh my gosh, like I can remember doing all this stuff on my own.
Yeah.
Now
I
I have all
remember
this
when life was
bandwidth, and you're
simpler.
handling
Yeah.
all these things. Yeah, imagine us negotiating your LOI with you, and then us doing the heavy lifting on your lease negotiations, and all the resources along the way to get all of that stuff done. Construction vendors to step right in and run the construction, and it's like, it's really nice to have all those resources, especially if you have perspective having done it on your own.
Sure. Absolutely. As you began, I want to ask this question. Usually I ask, like, as you began wearing that business owner hat, like, what were some of the things that you did well? What are some of the things you learned from? It seems like you have a couple of phases to kind of renegotiate what it is that you learned and renegotiate what it is that you needed to know. So when you first started wearing that business owner hat, what were some of the things that you did very, very well? What were some of the things that you learned from as you kind of kind of renegotiated the practices of your business to this franchise model? Answer that question for me again.
Yeah, I think early on, the thing that I did well is I understood the customer, the end user, like that part. I understood who our avatar was. I knew how to speak and service that avatar in the right way. So the thing, right, the machine that was built to fill the gap in the market was the right machine.
Mm-hmm.
That was something I figured out intuitively. Now, everything else that had to do with business, not so much. I'll put it this way: when I was a sophomore in college, I was an exercise science major, and I switched my major to business because I was already doing essentially what everyone that was majoring in exercise science wanted to do, which
Mm-hmm.
was this new thing called personal training, right? I'm like, well, I'm already doing that. Like, if this is all you guys want to do, I'm already doing it. Like, I'm going to open a business doing it, right? Which, again, no one had done it. They're like, well, that's weird. You're just going to have a whole place dedicated to one service. I was like, yeah, of course. And so then it was like, well, I better switch to business. And as you know, that's great, but a formal education doesn't necessarily cross over to entrepreneurship. I know there's, some colleges, especially here in Atlanta, they have entrepreneurship majors now, which are more helpful, and I help teach some of those courses. I'm really passionate about entrepreneurship, but I didn't have any of those skills. So here I am now in the business track, right, moving away from exercise science. And I could distinctly remember, Bailey, being in a class and we were talking about hiring people, and the professors giving all these theories on hiring. And I had just hired like 10 people, and here I am, 22, in this
He's making
class,
you second guess
and
everything you've ever done. Yeah.
well, yeah, well, he's saying it, and I'm thinking that none of this makes any sense because I literally just hired 8 people. None of these things he's telling me are essentially true to me in the real world. So I asked him, and in hindsight, I could understand why he would have been a bit offended. And I just said, hey, just as a quick question, like, have you ever hired anyone, like, for real? Like, have you ever really hired anyone? And I didn't mean it maybe the way it came out, but I can understand why he took offense. So he did. He took offense, and he said, well, no. And then, of course, he said, well, have you? Like, who are you? And I was like, well, matter of fact, I just hired 8 people last month. And everyone in the class is looking at me like, what? And so I quickly figured out that there's an entire skill set that needs to be developed that's not even necessarily from traditional education, right?
Absolutely.
Again, the good news is you can go get it. You can watch YouTube videos. Hell, I still take I can go right now on Harvard's online business portal and take a full-on class on business analytics or disruptive innovation, or I mean, there's a million things you can go cherry pick right now, you
Kennesaw
guys. Like, no
State
one's
actually
holding you
does
back.
a certificate and a degree for sales now. We've learned that
Yeah,
they actually have sales college.
yeah, 100%. So like, there's almost no excuse these days. Again, if you're a hustler, you can really do some damage
Be
to
a
the business in a
savage. I liked
positive
how you
way.
said that at the beginning.
Yeah, and so I think, look, ultimately though, every one of those steps, it requires a different skill set. And so here's what I'll tell any of your aspiring young entrepreneurs is like, if you feel like you're over your head, or you've got what we often refer to as imposter syndrome, that's a good thing, right? Like, if you're going to aim as high as you can possibly conceive for your life and your goals, and that's what I would recommend doing, like so far out that it scares you to death, right? Aim as high as you can and bring everything that you have to bear, every skill, emotion, everything you have to bear towards that higher thing. You're going to be much better off. Even if you don't get to where you conceived, moving in that direction, you'll find out that's the real, if you will, right? It's the striving and the moving forward and the learning and the struggling and the overcoming and learning and repeat, right? That's what it's all about. I mean, I could say that's what life is all about. Honestly, I've heard business described as a self-help journey disguised as a business. Entrepreneurship it is, and I would agree with that. So for each one of those stages, Bailey, I had to develop a different skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And in developing a different skill set, I therefore earned the right to be in a better opportunity vehicle, right? Okay, I'm a personal trainer at a gym. Great. Okay, I have to learn how to sign a lease and do all these things. Okay, great. If I can learn that, I've now earned the right to own a brick and mortar business. Awesome. Okay, well, that was going well till it wasn't. It's like, all right, well, then you have to upskill yourself and learn how to create business systems that are scalable, right? So that you can plug and play team members, and the business becomes the champion. It's like, okay, great. That's a different skill set. Okay, now I'm consulting. Now I'm telling someone else how to do the thing. That's a skill set. So each one of those steps required more of me. And I always felt a little bit in over my head, a little bit out of my depth. It's like, okay, I'm standing up here speaking to a room of 500, fitness people, and I'm feeling like a complete imposter, but that's okay, and earn it. If you feel that way, then go earn it. Like, upskill yourself until you are undeniably good enough to stand up there and say the thing and feel good about it, right? And then as soon as you get there, move the goalpost and keep going. And that's the only way you're going to get from, use my example, dumb personal trainer to CEO of a fast growing fitness franchise. And each one of those steps, like I said before, I really think anyone can do it, but you just have to be prepared to be very uncomfortable, to commit to lifelong learning, right? And don't expect to get opportunities that your skill set doesn't necessarily earn. That
Yeah,
makes sense. So
absolutely.
upskill, better opportunity, upskill. And this will be from now until you can't breathe anymore. That's my 2 cents.
Sure. What was as you started wearing that business owner hat, what was like the most difficult side of the business for you to embrace? Like what was the hardest skill for you to begin to develop?
I think for me, the thing that was probably the most difficult, and I'll have something to offer here as well, would be financial literacy. I don't mean it in the sense like you can keep your checking balance good and you make a few good investment decisions. I'm talking about leveraging debt to grow. We've been through a couple of proposed acquisitions that just weren't the right deal, but like, you need to understand how a deal structure works. That's a whole other skill set.
Oh
And
yeah.
once again, in this day and age, you can figure it out, right? So I would say financial literacy around business finance was a blind spot for me that I took too long to lean into, because I kept telling myself like, oh, I don't enjoy that, or I don't want to spend a day, buried in spreadsheets. And it's like, but don't do that to yourself. Don't speak that over yourself. Anybody can learn anything. And I'm not saying that you don't have to be a master of everything, but to have a basic understanding of these different functions is going to allow you to take on, again, better opportunity vehicles, because now you have a different lens, right? You see things differently. Again, you're playing chess. You can see the chessboard better, know which pieces to move around. And so for me, I think that was my biggest blind spot. I was good
Sure.
with people. I understood the thing that we did, understood how to deliver it to a customer well, but some of the business functions, especially the higher level business functions as we grew, were things that I needed to upskill. And quite honestly, I was a bit intimidated by them. I didn't necessarily understand them at the time. And as it turns out, it's no harder than anything else. You just lean in and figure it out, right?
It's like a different language is the way that I've explained it to people too. We've helped a couple people kind of begin that franchise process, and honestly, weirdly enough, it's a similar process for like taking a consumer good and getting a deal with a large retail location. So like, if you have a drink or if you have, whatever it is that you make and you want it all over the shelves at Public and Whole Foods and all those things, it's actually a weirdly similar process. Um, but another question that I had is how important was it for you as far as, financially and for like the solidarity and consistency of your brand to maintain some control over your franchisees?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at a license, so speak to the difference between those two. So when we were licensing and it was white labeled, you have no controls. That's
Oh
one
yeah.
of the things. There's like three things that you can do as a license that will keep you out of trouble for being seen as a franchise. Because if you're going to be a franchise, you got to do the thing, right? It's a very litigious business, and it's to protect the franchisee, so it's a good thing. But you've got to legal up, and there's a lot of heavy documents and things on the back end to control the franchise, which is good, protects both entities. But as a license, we had zero control. So our name wasn't on the front door, but we could build something for someone, and then what they did with it, it was up to them. Now, there's good things about that. It's like we got paid no matter what, right? But also we had no controls, and sometimes the controls are good because it would have protected people from making some terrible decisions,
Yeah,
right? And
for
so
sure.
now that
The
we're in a franchise
license in
structure,
Seattle operates completely different than the license in Atlanta. Yeah, the
well, and
licensee, I
listen, we
guess.
were different in from door to door. So imagine like if we licensed a CrossFit facility in San Diego, right? It was a completely different subset of products and services and things that we were doing for them than it was like a giant tennis center in Colorado that
Hmm.
might be a big family place, 120,000 square feet, that does pickleball and tennis. It's like, all right, that's a different thing, right? So there was a lot of consulting on the front end. So we would come in and build comp structures and pricing and sales processes specific to those types of businesses. And then we would deploy whatever parts and pieces of the platform would be most beneficial for them. But that was hard to do because we were in all these different door fronts and they all had a different business structure. So there was no way to control it. In other words, if you were like, hey, I'm in Atlanta, I want to go see an alloy club, and I'm air quoting, it's like, well, you can, but it might not even be relevant at all to you because it might not be the business model that you're running. Because
Mm-hmm.
we were different for everybody, like guns for hire, right? Now in a franchise, completely different. So I love it because it's the most alignment of, the most aligned business that you can possibly imagine. We're making a royalty, which is a percentage of top line revenue.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't making money unless our franchisees are making money. So now when we're coaching them, we can coach them very directly to a specific playbook and all the whys behind it. And we have a mutual win in mind. So it's like, we're not going to make money unless these guys are successful. And I love that alignment. So more controls, but also more risk for us because now we're dependent on that third party relationship to make money, right? Whereas in licensing, they paid us either way. So there's pluses and minuses to both. I would say the franchise is a better vehicle for entrepreneurship, which is why I love it. The two things I'm most passionate about is fitness and entrepreneurship. And this franchise allows me to put both of the things together and take it to market, which is it's awesome. It really is. But you're also, you're then dependent on them to execute to make money. So it's pluses and minuses to both. But I would say franchising, you've got a better vehicle. And if I'm honest, the enterprise value is much higher. So,
Mm-hmm.
you ask about our runway. If we can get to 100 open, which it looks like we'll be at by the end of 2024, we don't have any VC money. We don't have any friends and family rounds. It's a very simple, it's just us, right? And so we're able to, for lack of better terms, bootstrap the whole thing. We are an absolute unicorn in that regard. Most people, they got a hamburger shop. It's cool. These franchising guys come in, they franchise it, and then they pour all this fuel on the fire and then they hope it works in all these markets. It's like, all right, well, we didn't approach franchising that way at all. So we've got a really good machine built for a clear gap in the market that we had a big look at worldwide. It seems to be working really well. We've got enough financial wherewithal to ramp this thing to 100 operationally, on our end. And if we can, then the enterprise value will be so high that at that point we'll probably take on a round of investment, for an equity piece, throw some money in our pockets, throw more fuel on the fire, and keep going. So it's all good, man. But they're different. Each one has its pluses and minuses. But I'm really enjoying the franchise vehicle.
I think you're a little different than your typical franchisor as well, though. I mean, honestly, just being 30 years old makes an incredible difference as far as like the contingency in which people approach the idea of success. You know what I mean? Because you have to be a good teammate. Like you can't be a bad teammate on the franchisor side or the franchisee side and expect to have any success because you will waste, $80,000 that you spend, acquiring a franchise and then running it directly into the ground because the franchisor has built the business in a box. And if you don't use the things in the box correctly, it costs everyone money. So I speak that language. That makes a lot of sense. And I understand the difference in those things as well. And I think what you said is a big key for people to understand as well, that there are benefits to both. You know what I mean? Like if you're rendering a product or service and your product or service does not command an incredible amount of regulation as far as consistency goes, like it happens a lot in technology. You know what I mean? Can license technology out, and then however you skin it and whatever features and benefits you build and add on to that to make it work for you is absolutely fine. You know what I mean? So there are good times where the licensing play is a really, really good play. But I love what you guys are doing with the franchise model because it's completely in line with the way that you've done business from the beginning. You're basically adding a new team member and making them put skin in the game so that they're also invested in it, and teaching them the XYZ 1, 2, 3 of here is what we need to do together to be successful. And then, putting them in the car and helping them drive. You know what I mean? So like it's a really, really cool thing. And I think that the scale that you guys are operating at is incredible. 100 open and functional markets by the end of next year is going to bring you guys an incredible evaluation. So kudos to you, my friend. I appreciate you summing a lot of that stuff up for me. And I just wanted to kind of hit it again before we went on to the next thing. I wanted to ask you this as well, right? I don't talk to a tremendous amount of people in the fitness space, right? I was an athlete. I went and did some athletic stuff in college and all of those things, but I'm no world class athlete, and I definitely um, I wish that I had the mindset that some people have about fitness, because I have to be doing something fun in order to engage in fitness. I still play basketball. I love to play pool. I hate to run. I don't want to go swim. You know what I mean? But I know it's what works. Tell me something that maybe, and we do this in my office on Monday as well. It's called "Tell Me Something I Don't Know," right? And it's for our salespeople to basically be able to, speak the language of the people that they're talking to about the service that we provide, right? Tell me something I don't know about either the business side of the fitness industry or about my body in general that maybe I can use to kind of spread that information to someone else whenever I'm talking to someone that is in a similar space as you are. I'm itching. I know that I feel like you are full of those things that I absolutely have no idea about.
Yeah, let's just do the fitness side of it because I don't get to talk about that much because
Yeah,
I'm always
absolutely.
pigeonholed as the business guy. Even
No,
when I
I'd
go
love
speak at
that.
conferences, I'm on a tour with guys that are like, the top strength coaches in the world, like
Mm-hmm.
strength coach of the Yankees I mean, like, the best of the best, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I've got really good influences from the fitness side or the performance side, but I'm always the business guy. So I typically am answering business questions. So yeah, let's talk fitness for a minute. So I think what's surprising, not to us because we have a ton of empirical evidence, but finally science is catching up and proving this, is that the number one tool that you have for any fitness goal, whether it be fat loss or just general health, or like you said, you want to play recreational athletics, you have to strength train. Like strength has to come first. And that from age 30 on, you are experiencing what's known as sarcopenia, which is basically muscle loss in layman's terms. And everybody has it, right? And so I think the stigma of like strength training was a bit bastardized in the 70s by guys like Arnold and the bodybuilders. And then it was, people like you might hear someone female saying, well, I don't want to lift weights, I don't want to get too big. All that's kind of gone now. I mean, if you go to any fitness influencer page, whether she's female, male, whatever, they're all doing strength training as their main source. And it turns out science likes that, right? So
Absolutely.
I would say for someone like you, like you're like, hey, I don't like to run, I don't like to swim, and I'm kind of like giggling because you're like, I know those things are good for you. I'm like, they're okay. That's not where you should start, though, right? You should start by strength training first. So here's your hierarchy, and this would be, let's just talk about general health, and I would say it would cross over to all the other areas that we've mentioned, but general health. So here's what we're finding. So if you had say a baseline of fitness or health, let's just say health, baseline of health, and you're on a ladder, and if you added a fitness routine, and then we'll get into what in a minute, it's going to move you, say, three rungs positively. So three rungs up on that ladder. Now, in the studies that we've seen, and we would never suggest this, but let's say that you were a smoker and you chose not to address your smoking habit, I mean, you're going to keep smoking. That might bring you one rung down on that ladder, right? It's like, okay, got it. That makes total sense to most people, right? Let's say that you have type 1 or 2 diabetes and you're treating it, but you're not as diligent about it as you should be, right? It's a disease at the end of the day. So it's like, okay, that might be another one rung down on the ladder. And again, we would never suggest that you don't treat it the way you should, but it happens. So if you look at those metrics as an example, even if you smoked and didn't treat your smoking habit and you didn't treat your diabetes as well as you could, you would still be net positive on that ladder from baseline if you started exercising. Remember, three rungs up and you've got one and one coming the other way. You're still net positive one rung on that ladder just by adding exercise to your lifestyle. So it's like, great. The next question would be kind of what we were just talking about. What type of exercise then, right? Like I've got this much time in the week. What should I do? And here's the prescription for most anyone, right? Strength first. So what does that mean? Well, you know, 3 days a week, get into some kind of a strength training routine. It doesn't have to be bodybuilding. You don't have to spend hours in the gym. If you're 3 days a week from 30 to 45 minutes, you're going to be just fine. And then what happens in those times? It's like, look, it's your basic things that we all know, right? Do you do machines or free weights? And we can get really nuanced into those kind of things. I don't think those things matter as much as that. You're doing some strength training and you're pushing it to a point where you're not getting injured, but you're working pretty hard, right? So you're not just piddling around with the pink weight rates and things like that.
Yeah,
You're
heart
working pretty
rate's
hard.
elevated. Your muscles are hurting a little
Not even
bit.
that so much, not even like heart rate, because we're going to get to that part in a minute. So we're not talking about heart health. We're talking about your muscle system is now considered an endocrine system.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have more lean tissue in your body and it's working and moving, it is causing a completely different environment in your body from a hormone standpoint, from a fat burning standpoint, metabolically. So whether you're going weight loss, just general health, whatever that may be, strength training first. And that's slowly coming around. But when you look at a lot of fitness franchises these days, it's like a cardio class. Go to an Orange
Mm-hmm.
Theory, and I mean, props to them. It's better than doing nothing. And I think maybe that's worth saying as well. Like, if you're not doing anything, do something. Check, right? But if you're going to allocate time, what should it be? You shouldn't be doing a cardio class 3 or 4 days a week. That's not best use of your time. So strength training first, and traditional strength training, not boot camp. And I'll tell you why. Okay, next, imagine if your heart rate, now we're going to get into like air quoted cardio, right? So you've got heart rate that you need to have a healthy heart, and you need this for just general health. And if you want to play basketball, of course. So you have a 1 as the lowest level, and you have a 5 as like the highest possible level. So you need to spend the bulk of your time in what we call zone 2. So that would be like you can walk, briskly, or whatever you could do where you're mildly winded, but you could do it all day if you had to. So imagine like you got a small weighted backpack on for a guy like you. You're pretty fit, and you're just moving, right? You could do it all day, but you're sweaty and you're a little bit out of breath, but like you can have a conversation while you're doing it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, how much then? And this will be a lot for a beginner, but eventually got to pay the piper. 3 hours a week. So now you have your strength training, and you got 3 hours a week at zone 2, which is way lower than what most people are used to doing. Okay. Now, 1 day a week, Bailey, you need to be at zone 5. And zone 5 is something like 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off. And 3 minutes on is like, I'm talking about zone 5, like all out. If it was 10 seconds more than 3 minutes, you wouldn't make it, right? That can be done on a bicycle if you have joint pain, like the air bikes. You ever ridden those, like the Airdyne bikes? Those things are horrible, but they're also really good because any fitness level can do them. That's 1 day a week. So if you imagine we had zone 1 being the lowest, we're not doing anything. Zone 2, you could do all day. Zone 5. Notice where we didn't stay. Zone 3, 4, right? And those are known as what we call the garbage zone. And so unfortunately, that's where most people go. You go to a 45-minute boot camp class, you're certainly not low enough to get the heart health benefits of a zone 2. You're not at a zone 5, so you don't get that. You're not glycolytically challenged at zone 5, so your VO2 max is not going to change. You're just sort of surviving in this, what they call garbage zone, which is a derogatory term, but like no man's land, right? And that's where we all stay. You go out for a run, it's like you're not at zone 5 because you couldn't go for very long. You're not at zone 2 because you feel like you're going to kind of die, right? You're just surviving, and you're in zone 3, 4. And that has a whole, litany of things that happen with hormone response, stress, cortisol, like all these things. Makes you hungry, right? It's like all these things that aren't necessarily that healthy. That's the prescription. So if you're going to exercise, strength first, move more at a lower pace. I mean, in these blue zones where people live to be 100 plus years old, they're not doing HIIT training, right? They're just walking around everywhere and gardening and hanging out with their friends, right? You don't need to do that stuff. Every now and then get your heart rate really high for that high-end VO2 max, because that's also a predictor. There's things now like grip strength for longevity. Check. How long are you going to live, right? Okay, well, one other one is VO2 max. Well, you're not going to push that up just going to a boot camp class 3 days a week. So anyway, it sounds like I'm throwing shade at what most fitness does, but that's not necessarily me. These are the top scientists and anti-aging experts in the world saying, hey, if you want to be healthy and you want to live a long time, do the things you want to do, this is what you need to do.
I'm sure they're still saying, hey, it's way
weeds,
better than nothing. I'm sure they're also of the mindset it's way better than nothing. So
yeah, and anybody listening, great. Like if you're going to start exercising and you're not doing anything, that's where you start with strength, start walking more, and eventually add in some high heart rate stuff. If you're not doing anything and you love, like you said, you don't like to exercise and you love going to a boot camp class, it's not the best use of your time. It may cause you some issues, but I would say it's still better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place to start. But if you said, well, I'm going to dedicate time to exercise, what should it be? It's the prescription that I just gave you.
How long in the zone 5?
I mean, literally the most that you would be able to go would be like 5 minutes tops, because you want to push it like as hard as you can.
Sure.
So, and it should require you to rest as long as the interval that you were working. So say you went 3 on 3 off, right? So if you get, say, on an Airdyne bike and you go 3 minutes as hard as you can, and for those of you guys that are listening, that might be the bike that's got the fan on the front, like your grandpa probably had one in his basement, and now they've made like a huge comeback, and so everyone's got one now, and they're really popular. It's a hard workout, but it won't beat you up. So you go full
It is
out
a
for
hard
three
workout.
minutes.
Yeah, I have one of
Oh,
those.
it's awful.
I
Like
have one
you
and
feel
it
like
is
you got the flu.
miserable.
It's
It's
the
very
worst.
satisfying though, and because I have a new baby. I have a 2 month old baby, right? And so like we moved all of our exercise stuff out of the house, and then I slowly started adding it back into the baby room because baby doesn't really need their own room when they're 2 months old. So like I put the resistance bike in there, I put the Aerodyne bike in there, I put the rower back in there. I did all of
Good for
those
you.
things.
Yep.
It's super satisfying to feel the air moving around the room from the Aerodyne bike. It really makes you
Yeah.
feel like you're doing
Well,
some
you
work.
could do your zone two training on your regular bike, right?
hmm
Just
That's
get into
that's
that zone where
usually
you
what
like,
I
I could
do.
go all
We
day, but like you could do work on there. You could like there's that zone two is nice because it's not killing you. So you'll also be more apt to do it if it's somewhat enjoyable. Um, and then yeah, once a week you're gonna pay the piper and get on that Airdyne and go 3 minutes full out, and then you're 3 minutes off. You can actually get off the bike. You don't even have to pedal. You can just like walk around or sit down and have a heart attack if you need to. But it's like you got to do that, and so enough of those intervals, like 3 on 3 off, like 5 times.
hmm
That's going to be 30 minutes. That's all you need, but you got to really push it, right? So that's the healthy prescription, but it's got to be strength first.
Yeah, I need to do that. I need to do more of that, the Zone 5 stuff, just because the challenge sounds interesting to me. I don't spend enough time in that zone. I do the Airdyne bike and I do the resistance bike. I use that usually when we're on calls and I know it's going to be like 40 minutes and I spend the majority of the call just muted,
Right.
that's a very normal thing in my life.
That's
Sunday
perfect.
I play basketball every Sunday. We still play at a pretty high level. It's a bunch of old college guys and ex pros and things like that too. And I spend a decent amount of time feeling like I may die soon. So I think I think I'm hitting there where I need. But that's interesting. I appreciate that. That was a really really good piece of information there. The way that we always pretty much end the podcast, a little bit back on the business side of things. How if people want to get a hold of you, they want to buy a franchise from you, they want to bend your ear about something, they have a really good business idea. How do they get a hold of you?
Alloyfranchise.com would be the best way. There's a form you can fill out there. So, again, you can go to alloypersonaltraining.com, which is our consumer site, and it would push you. You can then click on, the franchise site, or you can just go straight to alloyfranchise.com. And I'm all over social media. So, Rick, last name's Mayo, Mayo. And I mean, you can find me everywhere from, you name it, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I'm everywhere. So you can hit me up there for sure.
Cool. The last thing we talked about a little bit before we got on camera, the name of the podcast being Burn the Ship. We always ask like what that light switch moment of when you decided you were going to be an entrepreneur feels like. But I think you have a little more extended perception of that saying in yourself. So I would love for you to give me like, what does burn the ship mean to you? And in those different phases of your business, kind of what does it mean? I'm interested to hear that as well before we get off of here.
Yeah, I think it means different things to different people. And if I understood you early on, our audience is a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs or
Yeah,
young,
absolutely.
young folks that are getting into business. I think at that stage, it means exactly what it means. And if you guys haven't explained it to them, if you've never listened to this podcast, it basically means, the analogy is like you sail into, say, a foreign land, let's say Columbus lands in Central America, and he's like, all right, it's going to be scary here. Everybody's going to go back. But one way to assure that there's no way back is I'm going to burn the ship, right? So there's no way back. So we've got to suck it up and make this work. So that's the same analogy in business. Is like I'm going all in. There's no backup plan. There's no plan B, right? I think for young entrepreneurs, or like for me when I opened my gym, I think it's a great strategy because like you don't have anything to lose really, right? I always joke about like if you're living in a van down by the river, right, or your parents' basement, and you go all in on something, the worst case scenario is you're back in your parents' basement. I
Yeah,
mean, and
you lose your van.
I don't mean that derogatory. Yeah, you get a
Yeah,
smaller van. Like
yeah,
it sounds like being derogatory. So I love it. And I think at some point, what it also can mean is if all this Instagram BS about, 9 forms of income and all this, no one's done that. Anybody will stand up there and say, follow your passion and diversify your income and all that. They've already made it, and they probably made it like smelting metal or the
hmm
garbage business, the most boring business ever. They sucked it up. They learned it. They stacked skills,
Yeah.
and they
Did it
sold
for
out, made
20
a
years.
gazillion dollars.
Yeah.
Did it for 20 years, and now they're telling you follow your passion. I'm like, you didn't do that,
Yeah.
So I don't fully
Exited for
believe in
9
that.
figures and then
Yeah,
started
and then they're
following your
like,
passion, didn't you? Yeah.
then you invested in 8 or 9 things, all passively, by the way, or you sat on some board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a terrible strategy. So burn the ships can also mean, for the young entrepreneurs listening, is it's focus, right? Like, quit getting distracted by all the squirrels that run through the room, which is sort of the entrepreneurial brain at times. Burn the ships can also mean it's not just money, it's also bring all of your skills and focus to bear on a thing, right? And the risk is that it might not be the right thing, and that's okay, right? I think, again, aim high, bring everything you have to bear towards that higher goal. You might take a fork in the road at some point, but you're still going to be better off than if you don't do that, because staying there and, again, trying 8-10 different things is not the strategy. Now, we'll tell you this: if you're at my stage and you've accrued some assets and you've got a little bit of wealth, burn the ships is maybe not the best strategy,
Yeah.
right? And I say that because, like, I'm not going to go all in on something that would risk, my assets or the things I have. Like, I give examples. Like, we've got franchisees that are, developing multiple markets, and they're figuring out ways to create, like, business shell organizations so they don't have to sign personal guarantees on all the leases, right? Because they don't want the personal exposure. So I think in that regard, I'm not going to burn the ships through that lens
Yeah.
where I am now, because I have too many things to protect, right? So I think there's an advantage. There's this golden period for these young entrepreneurs where you don't have that much to lose. So, like, you can just throw everything you have at
Yeah.
something, and you have the ability to quickly pivot and start over if you need to. Whereas someone like me, that term "burn the ships" is a different, because it's like, all right,
Yeah.
I cannot do that because I have too many assets, too many things I need to protect. So I can deploy small amounts of capital. We often use this term, bullets before cannonballs. And what that means is, if you had a finite amount of gunpowder and you were fighting another enemy ship, and this may be attention, the gunpowder could be attention or money or whatever that may be. Are you going to pour it all in the cannon and just hope you get the right shot? That would be burn the ships from the young entrepreneur's lens, and that's okay to do that, right? But for me, not so much, because I only have a finite amount of these things and I don't want to lose it. So I'm going to put a little bit of gunpowder in some
You've already got
muskets,
gold
right?
on your ship. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly. So I'm going to ping a few off the hull out of a musket with a little bit. Once I find my range, I'll pour my gunpowder in there and go for it. So maybe a little bit more diligent about my business opportunities and the risk that I'm taking. So burn the ships, to me, can mean something different at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
But for the audience that you described here, I think it's a great idea. And I think it's not just money, it's also time and attention resource that you need to apply towards a project. And if you'll do that, I think you'll realize that you can be really powerful.
Yeah, I have. I've said it. I've said it before on this podcast because I love that answer. Right, a lot of people give a very emotional answer about burning the ship because they are new entrepreneurs, and they're still reeling from that experience of committing and seeing some short-term success and things like that. But I said, burn the ship means a different thing to everybody. Right, as far as what you're burning to commit to what you're committing to. Right. Bankruptcy almost also means a different thing to everybody, right? It means a very different thing depending on how much you have in your life. So
that's a great point.
Yeah, it is a risk to be weighed. I appreciate you coming on the podcast, my friend. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Truly, I know we're
great questions, and thanks for what you're doing, man. I love entrepreneurship. As I mentioned, I'm a fan, and I love that you're doing this for young entrepreneurs. And again, man, so many valuable resources. So lean in, listen to, if you guys are listening right now, listen to every single episode this guy puts out. It's invaluable. He's doing it for the right reasons. And I'm honored to be here, dude. Really.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to turn this off. I'll get this edited sometime. I'll get it edited this week. It's probably going to end up going out next week. But I'll follow up with you whenever it comes out. And if you want the full video file and everything, more than happy to give it to you for all the resources that you want to use it for. But again, thank you for coming on. And we'll do it again. We'll once you get to that, we want to take in a round of funding and we want to continue to grow this valuation. I want to meet up with you and buy you a glass of scotch, because that is something to celebrate, truly.
Look, if we do a round, I'm buying.
All right, works
Don't
for
worry
me.
about that.
Works for me.
Hey, I'll take my helicopter over to see you, and we'll do a live in-person podcast. We'll go from there.
I'm down for that. I am down for that. Well, until next time, my friends, thank you. See you.